shy waitress signed to an elderly guest. His son's reaction left everyone in tears. It was a quiet afternoon at the Regalia Grand Hotel, one of those places where the scent of roses lingered in the air, and the marble floors reflected lives untouched by struggle. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain, scattering light over guests who dined in hushed tones and silk attire. Among the glittering calm, a young waitress named Lila Rowen moved carefully between tables, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her crisp white apron. She was new here, barely 2 weeks into the job, and already she'd learned how to blend into the background. In a place like the Regalia, invisibility was survival. Lila wasn't like the other staff who joked behind the scenes or spoke confidently to guests. She was quiet, shy, and carried an air of gentle nervousness that made her seem fragile, though in truth, her silence came from years of learning to endure rather than speak. Lila had grown up in a small, drafty apartment on the city's edge, where life was measured in bills and borrowed time. Her father had left when she was 12, leaving her mother, Clara, to work 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Lila became the quiet caretaker of her younger brother, Jamie, who had been born deaf. For years, the two shared a world without sound, a private universe built from laughter and gestures, arguments and expressive faces, and bedtime stories told entirely with hands. When she was 16, Jamie fell ill. The long nights in hospitals, the endless waiting rooms, and the final silence that followed his passing had carved something deep into Lila, a kind of tender grief that made her even quieter. She had promised herself that whenever she could, she'd keep his world alive through kindness, through sign, through any small act that honored his memory. But life wasn't kind in return. After losing her mother 2 years later, Lila drifted through temporary jobs, cafes, shops, cleaning gigs, until she landed a position at the Regalia. To the guests, she was just another waitress in black and white. No one saw the stories behind her quiet eyes. That afternoon, she was assigned to Table 7, a private reservation reserved for Mr. Ethan Vale, the founder of Vale International, a man whispered about in the hallways with a mix of awe and fear. He was the kind of billionaire who never smiled unless there was a contract involved. Sharp suits, sharper words, an aura that made even managers nervous. But Lila noticed something softer that day. Across from him sat an elderly woman, his mother, Eleanor Vale, graceful in pearls and calm dignity. Lila balanced a tray of crystal glasses as she approached, trying to steady her nerves. But as she reached the table, she noticed something unusual. Eleanor wasn't responding to the waiter who had just asked for her order. Instead, she smiled politely and nodded without speaking. Then Lila saw it, a discreet hearing aid tucked behind her ear, and the way Ethan leaned closer when he spoke, his lips moving deliberately, his tone gentle and patient. It stopped Lila cold. She recognized that look in his eyes, the careful patience of someone who had spent a lifetime loving a person the world didn't always understand. It was the same look her mother used to have when communicating with Jamie. When it came time to take their order, Ethan's gaze flicked up, expecting formality. Lila could feel the weight of his scrutiny, the kind that expected precision, not emotion. But before she could speak, she took a breath. Her hands, trembling but determined, began to move. She signed softly, "Would you like still or sparkling water?" For a second, the entire dining hall might as well have fallen silent. Eleanor's eyes widened in shock, her hand flying to her chest, as if those gestures had pierced through years of quiet isolation. Then, slowly, she smiled, a radiant, tearful smile that transformed her entire face. You know sign language?" She signed back, her movement shaky with emotion. Lila nodded, smiling faintly. "Yes, my brother was deaf." The older woman's eyes glistened. Across the table, Ethan's expression faltered. For years, he'd watched people look through his mother as if her silence made her invisible. Waiters avoided her. Acquaintances grew awkward when she didn't respond right away. Every outing was a balancing act, him shielding her from embarrassment, her pretending not to notice. But now, this soft-spoken waitress was speaking to his mother in the one language most of the world ignored. From that moment on, something extraordinary unfolded at Table 7. Lila didn't just take their order, she connected. Each question came with graceful hands, each response with an unspoken warmth that filled the air between them. She signed menu options, shared light-hearted jokes, and even taught Eleanor a few new signs for fun. Laughter, silent but full of joy, bubbled from the table. Guests turned their heads, curious. They had never seen the famously reserved Eleanor Vale so animated. Ethan, too, seemed caught in quiet awe. For once, he wasn't thinking about board meetings or stock indexes. He was simply watching his mother come alive. And Lila, she wasn't just serving. She was remembering. As her fingers moved, she saw Jamie again, the little boy with bright eyes and endless curiosity who used to tug at her sleeve and laugh at her exaggerated signing. Every gesture felt like a thread connecting her to him, as if he were there beside her, proud of the sister who hadn't forgotten his world. When the meal ended, Eleanor insisted on meeting Lila personally. She took Lila's hands in hers, warm, trembling, grateful, and signed, "You made me feel seen today. You reminded me that silence can still be beautiful." Tears welled in Lila's eyes as she signed back. "You reminded me that love never leaves. It just changes form." The quiet between them was almost sacred. Ethan stood beside them, speechless. For years, he'd tried to give his mother everything money could buy, homes, comfort, security, but not once had he been able to give her this, the feeling of being truly understood. Later that evening, as the last of the guests left, the restaurant manager approached Lila nervously. "Mr. Vale wants to see you in the private lounge." Lila's stomach sank. Had she overstepped? Broken protocol? She'd never seen a guest more powerful than Ethan Vale up close, and now he wanted to speak to her directly. When she entered the lounge, Ethan stood by the window, city lights glinting behind him. His tone when he spoke was not cold as she expected, but low and thoughtful. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Sign for her, I mean. Most people wouldn't bother." Lila hesitated. "It didn't feel like something I had to do, sir. It just felt right." He nodded slowly. "My mother hasn't smiled like that in years. You gave her something I haven't been able to in a long time." There was a silence, one that carried more weight than any words. "She used to tell me," Ethan continued softly, "that kindness doesn't always need to make noise, that it can whisper and still be heard. I think I forgot that somewhere along the way." Lila said nothing, but her eyes softened. Then, in an unexpected gesture, Ethan extended his hand. "Tell me about your brother." She did. About Jamie, about their world and sign, about losing him. And for once, Ethan Vale listened not as a CEO, but as a son. When she finished, she said quietly, "In Jamie's name, I'd like to start something." The next week, Ethan announced a new training initiative, free sign language education for all Regalia Hotel staff, in partnership with a local school for the deaf. The program was dedicated to all the voices that live in silence. He also offered Lila a full scholarship to study special education, saying the world needed more people who could bridge hearts without needing words. Lila was stunned. She never asked for recognition. Her act had come from love, not ambition. But as Ethan explained, "You reminded me what humanity looks like when power steps aside for compassion." The story didn't stay within the walls of the hotel. One of the guests had filmed a short clip, Eleanor laughing and signing joyfully with the young waitress, and posted it online. Within days, it went viral. The caption read, "A billionaire's mother hadn't smiled in years until a waitress spoke her language." Messages poured in from around the world, parents, teachers, and children sharing their stories, their gratitude, their tears. People began learning basic sign language through free videos inspired by the story. For once, the internet wasn't filled with outrage, but with quiet, shared humanity. The Regalia Hotel's management even set up a small plaque near the dining hall, in memory of Jamie Rowen, whose silence taught us how love speaks. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor Vale returned to Regalia often, always requesting that Lila serve her. The two would sit by the window with cups of tea, their hands dancing gracefully in conversation. Sometimes they spoke about Jamie, sometimes about Eleanor's garden or her late husband, but often they simply sat in comfortable silence, two women from different worlds bound by the same quiet understanding. Ethan would occasionally join them. though he mostly watched from a distance, a faint smile softening his once stern face. He had begun visiting his mother more often, no longer hiding behind business excuses. Sometimes, Lila caught him practicing simple signs, awkward, hesitant, but genuine. The transformation was subtle but profound. The cold billionaire had rediscovered empathy, and the shy waitress had found her purpose again. One evening, as the day melted into gold over the city, Lila stood by the hotel's tall glass windows during her break. The reflection of the skyline shimmered before her, and she felt the familiar ache of missing Jamie. For a moment, she lifted her hands and signed into the fading light. Thank you, for the memory, for the chance, for the reminder that kindness is never wasted. Behind her, a voice said softly, "Talking to him?" She turned. It was Ethan. She smiled faintly. "Always." He nodded. "Then I hope he knows how proud he'd be." And for once, the silence between them didn't feel heavy. It felt full of gratitude, of memory, of something sacred. Weeks later, the Regalia's dining hall buzzed as usual with elegant chatter and quiet clinks of glassware. But something had changed. Among the staff, signs now fluttered between hands. Small greetings, polite gestures, silent jokes shared between colleagues. Guests noticed. Some asked to learn. Others simply watched with misty eyes. And at the heart of it all, Lila moved gracefully through the crowd. Not invisible anymore, but radiant in her quiet way. Kindness had not made her louder. It had simply made her heard. If this story touched your heart, remember, compassion doesn't always shout. It often whispers through those who have known silence. Because sometimes the smallest act, a gesture, a sign, a smile, can change the course of someone's world. Before you go, tell us in the comments. Speech balloon, would you have done what Lila did if you were in her place? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to American Stories of Kindness, because the world could always use one more story that reminds us love doesn't need sound to be heard.